There it is. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Communication Masterclass, where we are taking a deep dive into the topic of communication. And today we are talking with Trilby Johnson. Trilby is an emotional breakthrough alchemist and coach, author, and speaker. Trilby gets hired by individuals who want to go from zero to hero and heal relationships, alleviate stress, and cultivate emotional freedom in their lives, business and finances, health, and mindset. Welcome all the way from New Zealand, Trilby.
Yay! Hi.
So good to see you.
Yeah, thanks, Heather. I was really excited when I got your invite because communication is such a hot topic and it's so important. So thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. I'm so excited to talk with you about it today and hear your perspective because, you do really cool things in the world.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I do my best and yeah, thank you.
Well, let's just start with you. Tell everyone just a little bit about you.
Sure, I'll keep it brief because so I was born in South Africa during apartheid era. So already there I was learning how important communication is, or rather what's not said. Okay, it's otherwise called propaganda. So you really have to know, read between the lines. So we already started the communication theme, So I did my schooling there, and then my late teens, I was very fortunate because I was able to move to Switzerland, which changed my life totally. And I was immersed in a different culture. I had to learn French, and it was very exciting. And freedom. It was like, wow, I went from a country where I was constantly living in fear to a place where it was cool, It was really kind of the opposite. So I had to learn to deal with that too. And then, of course, learning another language, that's communication too, because you realize there's some very different communication styles, not only between same languages, but different languages, different cultures. So and then, so I lived there for about 20 years. It was amazing, and I really enjoyed that immersion. But my soul was called to New Zealand. That's the only way I can say it. I just felt this deep invitation from this amazing country. And I've been here 10 years now. So I came back to speaking English, and so I had to learn again, to communicate in a different way. And even though Kiwis and South Africans speak English, there's quite a few words. So again, this theme of communication, I've always been fascinated by people, by the way they think. And so also introverts, introspectively, why was I choosing the things I do? And so my journey has been really one from one where I hated myself and I lived in a lot of fear to learning to love myself. So I had to really sit down and have quite a few really serious talks with myself, and then get the support I needed. So communication is so important, and I think especially in this new age of technology where our way of communicating has changed so much. I mean, on the one side, we get to speak to people halfway across the world in different time zones like now, which is fantastic. And so in a lot of ways, it's brought people closer. We're more accessible to communicating with each other. And yet at the same time, there's these complaints. Everyone's on their mobile phones and people are just not talking anymore. And then there's the younger people. And they just that's how it is for them, So I think you see these different, the kind of pre-technology, mindset and this new mindset. But at the same time, it's still very important. I mean, I say to people, and you can see it on online bullying, and that communication is so important because when we receive a text or an email, we straight away go to our reference map, okay? And this is what we're going to be talking about, why we need to listen to ourselves and listen is not just hearing, okay? It's a process. It's about going into that and finding out what our map is, because we see everything through our map of the world, and that comes through socialization, and it comes through when we're parented. And for those who believe in past lives, which I do, even that, so it's huge. And even pre-technology, communication was a huge challenge. People, if anyone's gone to therapy, couple therapy, and successfully, changed their relationships, you can see how important it is, because you get stuck in this loop. It's really like a band that just plays over and over. Anyway, so that's all it. So all of that fascinates me. I mean, I really, and I love to get to the nitty gritty of things. So I really go right to the bottom, which gets boring for other people. But for me, it's just the way I process stuff. So, yeah, and I think for me personally, the way I spoke about myself to myself was life-changing, and of course, communication is great, because especially when you say things out loud, it's so important, because then you actually hear yourself. And so otherwise there's this inner dialogue going on. And I did neuro-linguistic programming, which is how the words we use and train our brain, basically. And that's why when you actually speak out loud, you start to really hear yourself, like, and it makes it more real. So that's also part of why communication is so important. And we're going to be talking about confrontation too, which I mean, I hated confrontation. And I mean, I'll be honest, it's not like I sit there and send out invitations, please come and be confrontational with me, So when I say I'm okay with it now, it's kind of, I'd rather not have it, but I don't shy away from it anymore. But it's a whole process. And again, having lived in different countries, people communicate differently, even within cultures, across cultures, socially, so, and communication is very much about information. So, so a bit about me. I love, for me, I think at the moment where I'm at, it's really about meaning. All communication, everything we do, it's about meaning. It's what it means to us. And the way that comes through is through our emotions, and so we really need to communicate with ourselves and understand what it is we're feeling, understand how to process it in ways that are healthy, so that we can create the changes and cultivate the emotional freedom and resilience we want. And that takes a lot of communication. In the sense, and people say, oh, but that's so much work. But the thing is, we're doing it anyway, but I think we're doing it incorrectly, or we're getting the results that we're getting. So it's time to stop, slow down, and talk. And I laugh because I see on Facebook, and there's a cafe here where they actually say, oh, sorry, we don't have Wi-Fi. People can actually talk to each other here. So it's,
places that have that. Well, let's jump in and talk a little bit about kind of where you were sort of starting to lead there of, the idea of communication, the end of it, the side of it of listening. And it's not just listening to someone else speak, but also listening to our own intuition. And so I'm curious for you to talk a little bit more about just like, we all think of communication as the talk, but communication is listen too. So
absolutely. I think the biggest part of communication is actually listening, because it's well documented, 90% of any communication is nonverbal. So if you're not listening, and that's why, it's not just the spoken word. And you can see this in a way. I love movies about con artists, because it's a perfect example. example where they're feeding you all the words you like to hear,
Yeah.
and their behavior and intentions like totally different, you
Oh,
know.
that's
So that's
great.
a great example.
Yeah.
So it's up to us, and I think it's about um, taking ownership for what's showing up in our lives. And I know a lot of people, it scares them because there's an element of blame, or we've been taught to, you know, be shameful and full of blame.
Mhm.
Um, but the true meaning of responsibility is the ability to respond. And so for that, you need to gather the information, and that's what listening is, you know. And we're kind of in a very result focused society, and so we always under pressure to perform, you know, and have results and have stuff to show, and you know, instant gratification. And so we keep busy, but we don't really stop perhaps, and you know, listen and really listen. And you know, I invite the people listening to this,
Mhm.
watching it, listening to this,
Yeah.
to start experimenting and try and have conversations like what I noticed too. Because I used to be a very good listener, and then I kind of lost that, you know. In you know, putting forward my business, I found that I was over talking people, and that, and it really disturbed me because I felt I lost that connection. And
Mhm.
I felt it most because I lost the connection to me, because there's a space in listening that's, it's hard to explain it, and I think it's very personal for us all, but it does create a space. And if we're all looking to, you know, be of value, that's kind of where it happens. And
Mhm.
I remember when I was really, you know, kind of, I was in my early 20s, and I was, one day I just thought, you know, what's life about, kind of, you know, like
As we
probably many
do.
people, yeah, as we do. And how can I be of value, you know, because I had really bad low self-esteem and all that. And I really thought, well, the only thing I really have to offer is my attention. And so
Mhm.
when I listen to someone, I'm 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 giving them my attention. That's the only thing I really have, you know, the time where I focus on that. And that was really profound for me. And it,
Yeah.
so when I kind of moved away from that, I felt that. I thought, oh no, something's missing here, you know, and I kind of thought, oh, um, and it was, I think, part of the process, and as perhaps many people in personal growth, you know, is once you kind of realize, oh, you know, this is what I'd like to work on, then opportunities start showing up.
Yeah.
So the first thing I did was to actually begin to observe myself in conversations, you know, and I still do it, you know, like where I finish people's sentences off and all that, you know. And because I'm highly sensitive, you know, I actually do, I pick up a lot of information before the person is, you know, bringing it forward. But I actually thought, oh, that's really quite intrusive. I'm not allowing them to express
Mhm.
themselves, you know. And it's different when someone's looking forward. So it's just
Yeah.
becoming aware of that. And then also just listening. To what the person says. And what really helped me is to depersonalize it, you know, and again, in confrontations or that,
Mhm.
it's not about me, it's about the other person. And
Mhm.
I've really cultivated a curiosity, and this fascination with people, is I want to understand how they think, you know. And when it's not, and I think a lot of communication nowadays, especially on social media, what I've noticed is nobody asks questions, you know. You
Yeah.
post something and people just boom, boom, boom. There's very few actually say, oh, well, what do you mean by that? Or what makes you say that? And it's like, you
Yeah.
know, where's the discussion? And that's
Yeah.
what I love about communication.
Mhm.
um, you can have amazing, sexy, delicious, yummy conversations, you know, where you
Mhm.
both leave and you feel like you've grown. And those are the kind of conversations I want. And it's not
Mhm.
even about yapping. You know,
Mhm.
sometimes if you ever have had a friend who comes, you know, grief is a great situation. Someone has very bad news. And sometimes all you can do is is hug them. Is just hold them, just sit with them. that for me is listening, because
Yeah.
you're there, you're present,
Mm-hmm.
you're offering your attention, and it's so there is a fine line between the mind, the mental, which is yapping away, and we need the mind, we definitely need it,
Yeah.
but we don't need it 24/7,
Right.
so
Yeah.
so yeah, communication's
Yeah.
great. And so I think it was Buddha who said the longest journey is from the head to the heart, and it's kind
Mm-hmm.
of in that it's about knowing yourself, know thyself,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
then you know the filters you have, you start to understand your beliefs, not
Mm-hmm.
from a place of this is who I am, but it's like, wow, this is how I operate, and this is how I process information. And so I have found there's an openness, there's a fluidity, there's a flow to it that's not, and then it doesn't matter what people say, because it's really interesting, and like,
Mm-hmm.
oh wow, they really think that
Yeah.
that's the way it is, and then ask questions and things like that. um but yeah, very important,
Yeah.
and to know ourselves, we have to be
Mm-hmm.
silent, we have to take time out and switch
Yeah.
off the busy and go into a different mode. And there's, the movement of mindset and all that, meditation, mindfulness, things like that,
Mm-hmm.
to support us. And it's
Well,
true, the only one who really knows you is you. So, maybe
well,
sometimes
yeah.
this, mm,
But that's the part that makes me think about the intuition and the listen as part as the connection to the intuition and listening, and allowing someone, like when just sort of like I'm sitting here listening to you and keeping quiet what's happening, anything in my head, and just trying to take in. And I was thinking about, well, so I was thinking a little bit about like the intuition piece of trusting that when it's time for me to say something, that what is important will come, and know inside of me that, like, okay, the answers are there, which means I can quiet this and focus here, and
mm,
and it will flow. And then also the other piece you said that I think is so valuable and important is the ownership of,
mm,
this is mine, that's
yeah.
yours, and how do we want to connect and flow together. I just
Yeah, absolutely. And
Yeah.
and I mean, words are amazing, because they do have power, but they only have the power we give them, And so
Mm-hmm.
what's very interesting for me is I've actually redefined my own words, in the sense, the energy behind the word, and that's the emotion. It's what
Mm-hmm.
it means for me when I say it, And I do have a bit of problem when I go out into society, because people are still referring to that, kind of definition, and sometimes it takes a bit of explaining. But even there, it's this energy thing is so huge, and I think we we don't realize how huge it is,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
those people say, oh, everything in the universe is energy, and
Mm-hmm.
for me, communication is really learning, how energy operates,
Mm-hmm.
um,
Mm-hmm.
through us and from us to other people. um,
Yeah.
and of course we see this in behaviors which have, been social, so we've learned through cultural and social indoctrination, and
Mm-hmm.
really asking questions. I love questions. Questions are superpowers, and we,
Yeah.
even that, I was not encouraged at all as a child to ask questions. I was not
Mm-hmm.
allowed to ask questions. I had to obey, it was very
Yeah.
much that children are to be seen, not heard. And so I really thought that, what I had to say wasn't important, and I had to really work on asking questions. But um, and I have a webinar on that, on how to make questions your superpower for conscious
Nice.
living,
I love it.
because the question is so powerful. And yet in our society, what I've observed is we've been trained that if you ask a question, there's got to be an answer. So it's coming back to the
Mm.
mind. So we get into this loop,
Mm-hmm.
And if our mind had all the answers, we'd be living on quite a different planet. And again, the mind has a role. Absolutely, I'm not at all for the school of get rid of the ego. Absolutely not. I'm for the wholeness integration.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's communication is asking questions, and it's very interesting to see you can get a lot of confrontation actually when you start to ask questions, because people think that you're aggressing them, whereas it's really just asking. And
Yeah.
um, already with linguistic programming, because they basically say the response you get is the quality of the question you asked.
Yeah.
And I struggled with that for a long time, because I thought, yeah, but I'm not responsible for people. But I have learned to ask in a way, and that's what's so lovely about face-to-face discussion, is you can instantly kind of tell how your questions come across, because the body language will tell you. That's why this nonverbal bit is really important too. um, and focus in on that, so it's huge. It's huge. We're
I want to,
communicating all the
yeah.
time.
Well, like always,
Yeah,
And
yeah.
something you just said really struck a chord, because I NLP as well, and I try to talk about this with people, and it doesn't land very well. So I'm really curious how you approach this. But what you just said about the quality of our questions, and I think there's another sort of whatever you want to call it, like framework with NLP, where they talk about that the responsibility of the conversation is ours, and if we don't
Yes.
like the response we're getting, that's us. And I think those two things line up of what you just said. And I think here's
Yeah.
where we get into confrontation, and I'd love to sort of just touch on this a little bit of like how to, like, the idea of, again, I think it's ownership of the quality of this conversation is my responsibility, but it's also yours, and how to
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely. And that's why we need to, well, it would be great if, we enter communication and discussions with a whole different mindset, that, wow, this is an opportunity um, to listen. I mean, like that conversation. If I've really found, if I do come from a place of listening, where for me, there's no judgment. It's just this kind of open space where I can hear whatever the person says. It's not about me, and where my triggers are paused, you know. So it is a mind frame as well, and it's an energy that we give off. It's and because we are sentient beings, people feel this way before we start talking. It's like when you ask someone, "Oh, how are you today?" and they go, "Yeah, I'm fine." I mean, everything about them is like, "No, it's not fine." So yeah, absolutely. And coming back to, yeah, so when you ask people questions, I think a lot of people, if they don't know, and we can see this often in parent-child dynamics, is especially nowadays. I mean, God, kids ask such a questions, and it's like, well, how do you answer that? Um, so really big questions, and I watch parent dynamics, and I think it's cool where parents just say, oh, well, I'm not sure, let's find out, instead of this like, don't ask questions that, or you ask stupid questions or that. And it's often because the person, there's a whole thing, oh, I'm the adult, I'm supposed to know everything. There's this whole belief system that's going and pinging and whatever. So it's about observing that, and yes, we're human, we do put our foot in it often. I mean, that's, I don't know about anyone else, but I've learned mostly from, where I put my foot in it and had to clean it up. And sometimes, the consequences can be quite, life changing as well, and you can lose friendships and that. But because
What
it
would
does
be,
take two, it does take two to have a conversation. And I think as well, there's a different communication, I think, like, with friends and that, and then professional, say in a therapeutic session, and but like I always ask my clients, and the first thing, is that they do take responsibility for themselves, because
Mm-hmm.
I only am a source of information, but the application is theirs.
Yeah.
So yeah, and sometimes it takes a few conversations, uh, to kind of thresh that out, because we haven't been taught to take ownership, and I think
Mm-hmm.
that's what's emerging now. People are starting to realize that the way things are set up is just not working. It's not
Yeah.
honoring, the
Mm-hmm.
values, and they're starting to say, this is not working for us anymore.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And communicating it. I mean, the youngsters are clearly speaking out, against weapons and that. And
Mm-hmm.
it's so cool, because it's just like, no, that's
Yeah.
not okay with us.
Yeah.
And that creates a movement,
Yeah.
ripples, and that. But we are always listening to whether we're
Yeah.
and communicating, whether we're
Yeah.
doing it verbally or, I mean, energetically, we communicate
Yeah.
anyway. So, yeah.
Yeah. I'm curious what if in our last few minutes, kind of to give everybody like one of your best tools to navigate confrontation and managing either yourself, or how, like what you give your clients as a tool to say, okay, practice this
Mm.
when you're having a confrontation with your spouse or your friends or your children or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, well, one thing that's really, because I'm a highly emotive person, so and because I didn't have I had to learn how to express my emotions. So I always say stop and breathe. It's really, and you
Mm-hmm.
can do that anywhere, especially if it's quite a heated conversation.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, it just say, reframe it. It's
Mm-hmm.
like, and it's not personal if people are confronting, even though it can seem, it's only personal when we engage,
Mm-hmm.
And then again, I think do your homework. It's a lot behind the scene preparation, because I have noticed that what's going on within me reflects outside. So, if I'm a bit agitated, I start to see agitated
Mm-hmm.
people.
Yeah.
But it's about taking that time to, set your intention for the day. It's so important.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
um, Breathe, really get into a space where you have the emotions, but you're not reactive, you're responsive.
Mm-hmm.
um, and try just listening to people.
Yeah.
It's interesting because
Yeah.
often the energy will just dissipate, and then you kind of both sitting there and, you look at each other and it's like, oh, okay.
You're actually
and
right.
and yeah. um yeah, and it's really not personal. I think that's the
Mm-hmm.
biggest thing to realize, even when it is personal, because yes,
Yeah.
there's times where, people swear, people can get really aggressive. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, road rage, things like that. I mean, make sure you're safe first, okay?
Yeah.
And we're not talking about abusive situations here at all. That is, get to safety, get the help you need. You're not
Yeah.
going to sit down and try and discuss. So, but this is in
Yeah.
everyday communication.
Yeah.
um,
Thank you for saying that.
yeah, and but in your spouse, or your partners or your relationships, really, again, that ownership, that person's in your life because, you've created a space for them,
Mm-hmm.
and how can you learn from it?
Yeah.
So again, ask questions. And I think one of the most important questions is this mine? Because we're picking up on each other's energy and thoughts, whether we're aware of it or not. And so for me, I don't know how it works, but as soon as I ask that question, either it just is gone.
So
It's like the
meaning,
energy just
mm-hmm.
goes neutral.
Yeah.
um
And so
yeah,
meaning what, like, so is this mine meaning the emotion I'm experiencing, or the
yeah,
maybe complaint?
everything.
All of it.
Just, is it mine? Because it brings a clarity with it. So if it's not,
Mm-hmm.
then the energy just goes really peaceful, and
I
just
see.
seems to be a way the energy responds.
Mm-hmm.
um and if the emotion is yours, then you'll know it, and then you can deal with it. You can
Mhm.
manage it in a way that's more constructive and responsible and understanding,
Okay.
then do your inner work, like, oh, wow, yeah, I remember, go back and try and find the origin or how long you've been behaving like that, because it's identifying behavioral patterns as well. That's really important.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think always just breathe, take a nice deep breath, because it brings us back to the present, and into our bodies,
Mhm.
and it taps us into that intuitive part as well. It slows down the brain, and we're able to move from the, lower cortex up to the frontal, where everything becomes more logical.
Yeah.
And I really, take the grandmom's advice, whoever said it, is sleep on it.
Mhm.
Don't make rash decisions when you're too emotional,
Mhm.
because yeah, that's when you put your foot in it. But
Mhm.
so sleep on it,
Overreaction,
and
yeah.
even then communicate to the person, you know um I need time out. I'm very emotional at this moment, and I just need time to cool down, and then we can
Yes.
talk about it.
Yes.
And please keep your promises.
Yes.
Well, stick to your word, and to yourself as well. Don't say to yourself, oh yeah, I'm going to have a look at it, and don't do it,
Yes.
because what happens is it erodes at your own
Yes.
personal trust, and that of
Yes.
course is reflected out.
Yeah.
So, come back.
Come back.
Yeah, come back, and yeah, the thing is, uncomfortable stuff is not going to go away on its own. It just tends to, grow and grow. So, and also just, expressing, like, in this moment I don't really know what I'm feeling, because I found that, is there were moments where I really needed that time to sit down, calm down, and see what was going on, because there was just so much conflict within myself. There was so much inner confrontation, and then also often seeing the lesson that that person came along as a kind of a little signpost, like, deal with your inner confrontation.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
it really is true that the more at peace and the better you communicate. For myself, I found, confrontational situations arise
Yeah.
less and less,
Yeah.
um, and for me, don't be afraid to, turn the question back on the person,
Mhm.
because if they're asking you for proof, I mean, I had someone who was asking me to prove my beliefs to them, and I thought, well, I can't do that, and I'm actually don't have to. So I just turned it on them and said, well, when you find proof, to the contrary, you come and see me. They were like, they didn't know.
That's,
So
yeah.
yeah, but
Now here, breathing. If
yeah,
we could all, like, if everyone just learned how to breathe better and
I
focus,
tell
like,
you,
we would need all the rest of the stuff we teach and learn. But like,
yeah,
so breathing, listening, curiosity, questions,
yeah,
ownership, and then the question. Say the question again. Oh, is this mine?
yeah. Is
That's the
this
ownership
mine?
question.
And
Is this
just
mine?
start that within yourself. Just every thought you think, every emotion that comes
Yeah,
up from a place of,
yeah,
curiosity,
yeah,
open-mindedness. Is
yeah.
this mine? And just observe what goes on in the body,
Oh yeah.
because it's amazing.
Yeah,
And yeah,
yeah. We could go on and on for another hour about the body piece, but we'll stop.
absolutely, absolutely.
Well, I
So
appreciate all that because I think it's such a good perspective to sort of come back to, like, how much we are responsible for the communication and how often myself I can get stuck in it and I hear other people blaming, like, this is somebody else's fault. And it's like, well, no, what's mine? What's my part in this? And if we could just take a deep breath and ask ourselves that, I think we would transform communication. So thank you for
yes,
sharing all of that.
my
And so
pleasure.
tell everyone what you have for them for their free gift.
Sure. Well, I will be assisting you in the breathing, because it
Excellent.
is such a huge and simple tool, and I know people roll their eyes like, oh,
They
another breathing
do.
exercise,
Yes.
and it's like, what I have to do for them to get how important it is, it,
Mhm.
and I'll example, when we're born, the first thing we do to become alive, is we have to take that breath. And the
Mhm.
last thing we do when we leave this planet is the breath leaves the body. That's how important it is, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah,
But it does. It's such an amazing tool to calm our nervous system,
yeah.
you know, because
Mhm.
we do get stressed and we do get in these situations, but it brings you back to you.
Yeah,
You know, so very important. So I have a 9 minute meditation audio. It's called Distress, Detox, Relax in under 10 minutes. And I talk you through um, a meditation, and please listen to it. You know, try and
yeah,
you know, if you have problems, because most of us don't breathe correctly and we don't breathe adequately, and
yeah.
3/4 of the 2/4 of two sorry 2/3, I'll get it right, my
There
fractions.
you
The
go.
brain uses 2/3 of all the oxygen in our body, so this is huge. So if
Oh,
we're not
wow.
breathing, you know, properly to
Yeah.
the capacity,
Mhm.
you know, our brain is our mental capacity to
Mhm.
operate our body, to respond correctly, you know,
Yeah,
is impacted
yeah,
because the brain is not getting enough oxygen. And so we all know what happens. The brain switches off certain
yeah,
parts of the body.
yeah,
So, you know, even as you said, you know, if we just sat down and breathed consciously for 10 minutes a day, which
yeah.
my audio invites you to do,
Mhm.
you will see amazing results. Okay, but you have to do it and do it
Yeah,
consistently, and it will help retrain the body. The body will then be in a less reactive state and in a more responsive state because
wow.
it's a training,
Mhm.
you know,
It
just
will
as
help
we
communication,
yeah.
help
So
relationships.
yeah, so yeah, and at the end, after you've downloaded, there's a video too where I explain more the details and the benefits of um, breathing. And because I used to have terrible anxiety attacks and
Mhm.
panic attacks, and anyone who's had those, they are horrific. You know,
Yeah,
you just
yeah.
totally. And the one thing that got me back was breathing. Yeah.
Wow, wow.
So, and
Excellent.
it wasn't medication. I was on medication and I still had these panic
Mhm.
attacks.
Mhm.
So, you know,
Yeah,
it's about coming back, breathing, being grounded, and the most important, it brings us to the present moment,
yeah. Which is where we need to be,
which is where
which
we
is
need
where
to
we are
be.
anyway.
Yeah, to communicate effectively with ourselves, with others,
Yeah,
hear what our body's saying, hear the information,
yeah,
and then you really hear things
yeah.
differently. And because your brain is oxygenized, you can actually, you know, assess the information. Yeah.
Mm, for sure.
So yeah,
Thank you
please,
so
my
much. I
pleasure.
appreciate it. Yeah, no, I appreciate the gift and I appreciate getting to have your time today all the way from down under, way far from me, but way
Yeah,
far from you.
my
Someday.
pleasure, Heather. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much, and thanks for this masterclass. It's really a great topic, and you know, very timely. I think a lot of people are struggling on
Yeah,
how to communicate
yeah,
effectively. You
yeah,
know,
yeah. We
so
all,
thank
yeah,
you.
work in progress. So thank you so much.
My
Bye,
pleasure.
everyone.
Bye.